Oh, thank God. Water.
Ethan Mercer stood on the porch of the ranch house his grandfather had built, looking out at a land that was slowly dying. The creek that had run through the valley for 100 years was nothing but a crack in the dry earth. The cattle were too weak to stand, their ribs showing through their hides, their eyes dull with thirst. The bank had given him 3 weeks to pay his debt, and after that, the Mercer Ranch would belong to someone else. 3 generations of his family, ending with him. He had not slept in days, had not eaten in longer. He was watching his legacy turn to dust. The stagecoach that came through Cedar Valley twice a week was usually empty, carrying nothing but mail and the occasional traveler passing through on their way to somewhere else. But on this day, a woman stepped down onto the dusty street, and something about her made Ethan look twice. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pinned beneath a simple hat and a dress that had seen better days. She carried a carpet bag in one hand and a leather journal in the other, and she looked around the dying town with an expression that was not despair, but something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. The town had no hotel, no boarding house, nothing but a mercantile and a saloon and a church that had not held services in months. Ethan found her standing outside the mercantile, looking at a sign that said, "Room to let," in faded letters. "There's no room," he said, and she turned to look at him. Her eyes were gray, like storm clouds, and they held a weariness that matched his own. "I can see that," she said. "I was just hoping." She stopped, looked around at the empty street, the shuttered windows, the dust that covered everything. Is there anywhere a woman can stay in this town? He should have sent her to the widow's house, or the preacher's, or anywhere but his ranch. But there was something in her face, something familiar, something that reminded him of himself, a person who had run out of options and was too proud to say so. "I have a spare room," he said, and the words surprised him even as he spoke them. "It's not much, but it's clean." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring him, and then she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer," he said. Ethan Mercer. She picked up her bag, adjusted the journal under her arm. "Josephine Harper. And thank you, Mr. Mercer. I promise I won't be a burden." The spare room had not been used since Ethan's mother died 5 years ago. He had kept it clean out of habit, out of respect, out of a hope he could not name. Now he stood in the doorway, watching Josephine Harper unpack her few belongings, and he felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was dead. "I don't have much," he said, apologizing for a poverty he had never apologized for before. She looked around the room, at the quilt his mother had made, the dried flowers on the windowsill, the photograph of a woman he had never known. "It's perfect," she said. And something about the way she said it made him believe she meant it. The first night, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over a valley that had once been green and was now brown. She asked him about the ranch, and he told her about his grandfather, who had built it from nothing, about his father, who had expanded it, about the drought that was killing it. She listened, her gray eyes steady on his face, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You're going to lose it," she said, and it was not a question. He nodded, unable to speak. She opened her journal, flipped through pages covered in handwriting he could not read, and said, "Maybe not." The next morning, Josephine asked him to take her to the dry creek bed. She walked its length slowly, stopping every few feet to examine the rocks, the soil, the way the land sloped. Ethan followed her, confused, impatient, watching the sun climb higher and the hours slip away. "What are you looking for?" he asked finally. She knelt, picked up a piece of rock, turned it over in her hands. "Water," she said. He laughed, and the sound was bitter. "There's no water here. The creek's been dry for 6 months." She looked up at him, and her face was serious. "The creek is dry, but the water is still here. It's just deeper." She explained it to him that night, sitting at his kitchen table with her journal open between them. Her father had been a geologist, she said. He had spent his life studying the land, mapping the underground rivers that ran beneath the prairie. He had taught her to read the signs, the way the rocks lay, the plants that grew, the subtle shifts in the earth that told you where water was hiding. My father believed that every drought was temporary, she said, tracing a line on a map with her finger. He believed the water never really leaves. It just goes where we can't see it. Ethan listened, and something in him wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that there was water beneath his feet, that his ranch could be saved, that the 3 generations who had come before him had not sacrificed everything for nothing. But he had been disappointed too many times. He had dug wells that came up dry, had watched his neighbors leave, had learned to stop hoping. "How do you know?" he asked, and his voice was rough. "How do you know it's there?" She looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw something that made his breath catch. "I don't," she said. "Not for certain, but I've seen it before. In other places, other droughts. The water was always there. Always." He decided to trust her. Not because he was convinced, not because he had any reason to believe a stranger with a journal and a story, but because he had nothing left to lose. If he did nothing, the bank would take the ranch in 3 weeks. If he dug where she told him to dig, at least he would go down trying. They started the next morning in a spot she had marked at the base of the eastern ridge. Ethan swung the pick while Josephine watched, consulted her journal, directed him left or right by inches. The men in town heard what he was doing and shook their heads. Another fool, they said, chasing ghosts. The first day, they dug 10 feet and found nothing but dry earth. The second day, 15 feet and still nothing. Ethan's hands blistered, his back screamed, his hope began to fray. But Josephine did not waver. She stood at the edge of the hole, her journal in her hands, her eyes fixed on the layers of soil and rock. "Deeper," she said each time he looked up. "We have to go deeper." On the third day, when they had dug 20 feet and found nothing but dust, Ethan climbed out of the hole and sat on the ground, his head in his hands. "It's not there," he said. "It was never there." Josephine knelt beside him, her hand on his arm, her face close to his. "My father spent 20 years mapping the underground rivers of this territory," she said, and her voice was fierce. "He walked every mile of this valley. He knew where the water was. And before he died, he told me that the deepest, purest source in the whole territory was right here on this ranch." She opened her journal to a page marked with a ribbon, showed him a map drawn in a hand he recognized now as belonging to a dying man. "My father was never wrong," she said. "We dig until we find it." They dug for 6 more days, 30 feet, 40 feet, 50. The hole became a pit. The pit became a shaft, and still, there was nothing but dry earth and stone. The men in town had stopped shaking their heads. They had stopped thinking about Ethan Mercer at all. He was already gone to them, already a ghost, already forgotten. But Josephine did not forget. She climbed down into the hole with him now, her dress tied up, her hands as blistered as his, her face streaked with dirt and determination. "It's here," she said each night, and each night he believed her a little more. On the 9th day, at 60 feet, Ethan's pick struck something that was not rock. He knelt in the darkness, his hands trembling, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The earth beneath his fingers was damp. Not dry, not dust. Damp. He scraped away the soil, his nails breaking, his hands bleeding, and then he saw it. A trickle of water, seeping from the rock, running over his fingers like a blessing. He looked up at Josephine, who was watching from above, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Water," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "We found water." The water came slowly at first, a trickle, then a stream, then a rush that filled the bottom of the shaft faster than they could climb out. Ethan pulled Josephine up the rope ladder, his hands on her waist, her face above his, both of them laughing and crying at once. When they reached the surface, they stood at the edge of the hole, watching the water rise, and he pulled her into his arms without thinking. She came to him without hesitation, her face pressed against his chest, her arms around his waist, and for a moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of them and the sound of water filling the earth. The news spread faster than the water. Men came from town with shovels and buckets, with horses and wagons, with a hope they had thought was dead. They widened the shaft, built a well, dug channels that carried the water to the fields and the cattle and the gardens that had been waiting for it. Ethan worked beside them, his body exhausted, his heart full, and every time he looked up, Josephine was there, her journal in her hands, directing the flow, showing them where to dig next. The woman who had arrived with nothing had given them everything, and the town that had dismissed her now called her a miracle. The night the water reached the farthest field, Ethan found Josephine sitting on the porch, her journal open in her lap, her face turned toward the moon. He sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder touched hers, and for a long time, neither spoke. "You saved us," he said finally. She shook her head. "Your grandfather built this ranch. Your father kept it alive. I just showed you where to look." He took her hand, his fingers finding hers, and she did not pull away. "You showed me something more than that," he said. "You showed me how to hope again." She told him about her father that night, about the years they had spent traveling together, mapping the land, looking for water where no one else believed it existed. She told him about the illness that had taken her father, the years she had spent alone, the day she had found his journal and decided to follow the map he had left behind. He believed that water was the lifeblood of the West, she said. He believed that if you could find it, you could build something that would last. She looked at Ethan, and in her eyes, he saw the loneliness she had carried. The same loneliness he had carried since his mother died, since his father gave up, since he realized he was the only one left. The bank came 3 weeks later, as promised. But when they arrived, they found not a dying ranch, but a valley transformed. The fields were green, the cattle were strong, and the water that had been hidden for so long was running in channels that had been dry for a year. The banker looked at the well, at the crops, at the man who stood beside a woman with dirt on her hands and a journal tucked under her arm, and he tore up the note. "Your father would be proud," he said to Ethan, and rode away. Ethan stood in the field, watching him go, and felt something he had not felt in years. Free. They were married in the spring, in the church that had been empty for so long, with the whole valley in attendance. Josephine wore a dress of white cotton, and in her hair, she wore a flower that had grown from the soil she had saved. Ethan stood beside her, his hands steady, his heart full, and when the preacher asked him if he would take this woman to be his wife, his voice did not waver. "I will," he said, and the words carried across the church, across the valley, across the land that had been given back to them. That night, they walked to the well, the one they had dug together, the one that had saved them all. The moon was full, the water was still, and when he took her in his arms, she came to him like she had always been there. "I came here looking for my father's legacy," she said, her voice soft, her face lifted to his. "I found yours instead." He kissed her then, there by the water, and when he pulled back, her eyes were bright. "We found it together," he said, "and it's ours. All of it." The water that had been hidden for so long ran beneath their feet, and above them, the stars were coming out, one by one, over a valley that had been saved by a woman who knew how to look beneath the surface, and a man who had learned, at last, to believe.